I don't have to tell you things are bad. Everybody knows things are bad. We know things are bad, worse than bad. I want you to get mad. I don't want you to protest. I don't want you to riot. I don't want you to...
At Warcraft devs.
Because I wouldn't know what to tell you to write. First, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm a
DK.
God damn it! My life has value! I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not gonna take this anymore!
DKs.
Rise up!
What's up guys, it's Ed. So today I am bringing you a guide to the changes in 8.1 for Unholy Death Knights. This is mainly focused around PvP, however I'm sure that PvE players can take away something from it as well. So let's start with the great changes. First off, Necrotic Strike is now AoE, provided you are standing in Death and Decay, and being a melee ability, the enemy targets are also standing in Death and Decay most likely. A ton of new Azerite traits, which feel very powerful, not overpowered, but they are potent and playstyle altering in my opinion. For the first time ever, I felt compelled to choose a DK specific trait over another high value generic one. Lastly, most importantly, it feels like Unholy is starting to reclaim some of its dispossessed identity. Having played the class since Wrath of the Lich King, I've seen this slow decline towards a homogeneous melee. This is a nice step back towards what we used to know and love. A wonderfully complex but fun melee DPS class. Okay, now the good changes. They gave us an additional passive survivability bonus in the form of an ancient, I'm talking Wrath of the Lich King passive ability called Veteran of the Third War. This is a 10% stamina buff class-wide no matter what spec. Clearly this is in response to an outcry for greater survivability. I get it. However, stamina doesn't solve all ails, especially in a PvP context where mitigation generally outweighs additional HP if given a choice. Since this is being recycled, let's take a look at what the title actually implies. Veteran of the Third War. Death Knights first saw employment as Scourge commanders during the events of Azeroth's Third War, encapsulated in the events of Warcraft 3 and its expansion, the Frozen Throne. So during this era when the Scourge was employing Death Knights as frontline battlefield commanders, Death Knights were exclusively wielding rune blades or, in some rare deviations, thanks to the expanded universe, other bladed weapons such as one-handed swords. Regardless, as masters of the blade, it only makes sense that their expertise be recognized in a manner more meaningful than a stamina buff. If we're being honest, how can we say that a warrior shouldn't be able to claim a stamina buff with just as much credence, as they too occupy a permanent place on the front line of any conflict? It would be far more in keeping with the class fantasy and current PvP needs if 5% of that 10% stamina buff we're receiving was redistributed to a 3% increased chance to parry, the net result being 5% increased stamina and 3% increased chance to parry. Parry not only fits the lore, but offers a sorely needed, albeit random, mitigation tool for DKs being crushed in matchups with other melee classes. They have plenty of tools to deal with spell damage already. Furthermore, this increased parry will be wasted on players who do not properly face their attackers, as the mechanic is positionally based. This rewards good play from DKs and even better play from opponents who make habit of positioning behind a player before executing an important ability, i.e. kidney shot. As in return for their negation of DK parry, these enemy players now have 5% less stamina from the Veteran of the Third War version 1.0, as it is right now, to slice through. I think this is a change that both DKs and people who will be playing against DKs can agree on. That is good and fits in with lore. If you have any doubts as to how DKs can claim primacy over defensive swordplay, I would direct you to the Arthas and Illidan duel cutscene in Warcraft 3 Frozen Throne, which I hope for the love of God they don't desecrate during the Reforged remake. Now, if I said all that for what I label as a good change, imagine what I have to say for the bad changes, guys. Okay, here it comes. Bad change number 1. PvP talents feel like 10 pounds of stuffed into a 5-pound bag. Something has to give if they want the class to be competitive in rated PvP. Effectively now, there are 3 best-in-slot PvP talents with no room for experimentation. One of those best-in-PvP slot talents should have been made baseline a long time ago, and used to be. Yeah, you guessed it, I'm talking about Necrotic Strike. It is as essential to the Unholy DK PvP experience as Mortal Strike is to the Arms Warriors. Yet you don't see ARMS having to spend one of their precious 3 PvP talent slots on Mortal Strike. I highly suspect that Necrotic Strike is stuck in PvP talents because the dev team doesn't want the possibility of having Healing Absorption enter the PvE raid encounter design calculus. If this is in fact the case, then it's wrong, first off, and secondly, and more importantly, it's lazy as hell. Just as the dev team has applied all manner of hidden % less damage, % less effectiveness, % less healing versus players modifiers to abilities, surely they can reverse the process and do the same for non-player characters, essentially rendering Necrotic Strike a wasted global in PvE environments. This solves the potential problem of DK hyperviability and raids which involve boss healing, while allowing DKs the freedom to explore their PvP talent combinations the way other classes currently are able to. Now you may be wondering, what are the other 2 best in slot PvP talents I'm talking about? That is hands down Necromancer's Bargain and Lichborn. They blow all other talents available out of the water for reasons we'll explain later on in the video. Trust me though, I say this knowing full well that Necrotic Aura is still a straight up 8% buff to the majority of your own kit's damage, not to mention your team's. These talents are just that essential, and it's Blizz's fault for poorly sorting baseline abilities from the talentable. A massive reorganization of the talent tree, baseline abilities, and the PvP talentable skills is long overdue and could not come soon enough. A great starting point for the devs would be examine how to fit Necrotic Aura, Decomposing Aura, and perhaps some other ability on the same talent row. Let's say the level 90 row, where all of the talents are underwhelming anyhow. I know I won't miss any of them to include Defile. Yeah, I get it. The Lich King had it available and used it to wipe many of us during the Ice-Crowned Citadel raid and Wrath of the Lich King, but at the same time, never once in the history of the ability have I heard anybody talk about a killer or skillful or well-placed Defile turning the course of any match. It's just known as Death and Decay Plus. As for Epidemic, which is also sharing a spot on that same level 90 talent row, in my opinion, it's just a meter padding tool to be used in RBGs and raids that really doesn't promote good gameplay or class fantasy. Let's remember the Warcraft 3 origins of this beloved class. If you hover over the Death Knight tooltip on the Altar of the Damned and try to train it, it will exclaim to you, this is a warrior hero, evil counterpart to the Paladin. Let me say again, warrior hero. This overarching talent cluster aside, the devs have really missed the mark again on DK PvP needs. Instead of much needed damage mitigation tools, be they passive or active, they've instead slathered the problem in HP manipulation tools yet again. 10% additional stamina to Unholy and other specs in the form of Veteran of the Third War wasn't needed, but thanks. Azurite talents for healing during your IBF or Lichborn. Not what we needed, but okay. Transfusion, so you can spam Death Strike to top yourself back up to full after another class executes a simple burst rotation on you. Well, the runic power you have affording you 1 to 2 Death Strikes plus Chains of Ice Kiting and an Insurance Death Pact, if you really needed it, were already sufficient to top yourself back up. But whatever. For an example of what the class really needs, we have to take a look at their melee DPS brethren, who they often compete with for a slot in RBGs, arenas, etc. Arms has an at-will ability to take 20% reduced damage indefinitely. Fury has a passive 10% damage reduction baked into their standard DPS rotation. Not to mention, they have outstanding leech and the ability to apply a hot to themselves. And finally, with Vengeance, a 100% dodge chance for 1 whole second every 9 seconds, baked into their normal rotation. With just this small sampling of mitigation tools and 3 other competitive specs, is it any wonder that the leaderboards are filled with warriors and DHs? DKs used to have a near-peer competitor to these other mitigation tools we see today in the form of Blood Presence. While they had it, no one complained about survivability at all. It was a great boost to your stamina as well as armor at a cost of damage potential in the form of increased GCD timers that made for interesting play on both sides of the arena. It rewarded those who used it well and penalized those who didn't. As it stands right now, DKs are swimming in healing tools and are bereft of damage mitigation tools. And this, I believe, is contrary to immersive and engaging gameplay, and I'm sure many other Death Knights would agree. They are only 1 or 2 rungs above Warlocks in the auto train category. Also, I hope you're ready to grind some PvE content, because your best in slot Azerite armor pieces for head, shoulders, and chest are not from PvP systems, but rather from 8.0 Mythic Dungeons and the newly minted Battle for Dazar'alor raid. Now let's get into the actual details of these new abilities, these new PvP talents, and what they mean for us. The big elephant in the room is Lichborn. There's so much to unpack here. This ability is revolutionizing 8.0 Unholy Death Knight versus 8.1. There's just so many implications by choosing that Lichborn ability. First off, it must be noted that a Lichborn is modifying your Icebound Fortitude. It is not an additional defensive cooldown. This wasn't the case during its original implementation in Wrath of the Lich King, and I am vehemently against it, but it is what it is for the time being. So, with that in mind, we have to now examine Lichborn against the benefits you already enjoyed with Icebound Fortitude in order to properly assess its value in PvP. First, let's look at the damage reduction. This is a core component of what made Icebound Fortitude so important. 30% reduced damage for 8 seconds. Okay, now Lichborn. 30% reduced damage, just the same, for 10 seconds. Oh, okay, so that's 2 additional seconds of tankiness. Very awesome. So far, Lichborn is looking pretty good. Now, let's look at the cooldown on the ability. Icebound Fortitude, 3 minutes. Pretty long, but on par with other melee DPS's major defensive cooldowns. Okay, now Lichborn, 1 minute. That's huge. You can have it up 3 times as often, obviously, basic math. And more importantly, it lines up with just about every burst combination other classes have available to them. This means that it's not always going to be a great decision now to go on the Unholy Death Knight as it was before. You could kind of count on getting their trinket, getting their Icebound Fortitude, and you might have to deal with an anti-magic shell that was on a 1 minute cooldown already. Moving on, stun immunity on Icebound Fortitude. Lichborn also has stun immunity. Great. That's where the benefits stop with Icebound Fortitude. What else do you get with Lichborn? Now you're also getting fear immunity. Amazing. They don't have a fear breaking tool yet. You would have to preemptively AMS if you wanted to avoid, or you'd have to go undead for the racial. Not a popular choice. That's another huge plus. Fear immunity. Root immunity. I mean, that's amazing. You know, Death's Advance does not cover roots. Snare immunity. Okay. I mean, sure. I mean, snares weren't ever really an issue, seeing that Death's Advance passively ensures that you move no slower than 70%, and then while active, you move no slower than 100%. Snares weren't an issue, but it's all right. Sure, I'll take it. Now, while the tooltip exclaims that you turn undead, this is in fact false. It seems to be either a huge oversight from the dev team, which will serve to create a lot of confusion among people who have not tested out the ability yet. The reason you turned undead in the first place when the ability was originally rolled out is because it made sense in terms of class design. DKs then were able to death coil their pets in order to heal them instead of relying on a healer. With Lichborn, it brought about a ton of excitement from the player base because you could now death coil yourself as well, making you have to choose between whether or not you wanted to save your death coils for your pet or yourself. Additionally, this also brought some risk. By turning undead in order to heal yourself through Lichborn and or dodge CC, you also exposed yourself to all the same perils an undead mob would face, namely Priest Shackle, Paladins Turn Evil, and now in the current day and age, Paladins Wake of Ashes Stun. I tested this in duels with players outside of Borealis. My pet and I stood side by side with each other as a paladin bathed us in Wake of Ashes over and over again. My pet was stunned for a full 5 seconds, whereas all I took was a little bit of radiant damage. I think this is going to be a much weaker ability if you do become undead. So far, this talent's looking pretty good. Oh, yeah, I almost forgot about this part. You cannot move faster than 50% movement speed while you have it. So even though you're immune to snares, you're not immune to your own snare that you apply to yourself. 50% movement speed. This is a big issue because in PvP, speed is life. In scenarios where you feel pressed to even use a defensive cooldown like Icebound Fortitude or Lichborn, you're probably in a situation where you're trying to run away from the enemy team, create line of sight, create distance in order to prevent further damage. The reduced damage is just a stopgap measure until your healer can get that first big juicy heal off. And what you're telling me is by using Lichborn, I am now possibly subjecting myself to an extra 1 to 2 hard casts from pursuing wizards, and or the likelihood that that rogue is now going to get off an extra stun or incapacitate. This starts to get a little dicey really quick. So that's the gameplay reality of having 50% movement speed penalty applied to yourself when you use this. Now let's look at the lore. Why in the hell would this ever make sense? Generally in science fiction and fantasy both, there are two schools of thought when it comes to the undead, zombies, and the like. Either you have fast zombies or slow zombies. In the case of The Walking Dead, they're slow, they're shambling, they're not going to get anywhere anytime fast, but they are relentless. I think that's what they're trying to say here, that you know, with all these immunities, with this damage reduction, you're as tough and relentless as a zombie during its duration, but you're also as slow as one. Now, I understand that point of view if that is in fact the case. However, this does not fit WoW's own fantasy at all. When have you ever seen a slow skeleton, a slow ghoul, a slow abomination, banshee, what have you? The undead in World of Warcraft are of the former category. They are quick, they are nimble undead. They move at standard speed or quicker. I mean, have these devs even played Warcraft 3? Let's look at the origination for the undead race. Warcraft 3 and the Frozen Throne. Let's just ignore that convenient upgrade that ghouls had available to them called Ghoul Frenzy, which allowed them to move quicker and attack quicker permanently, making them akin to cracklings from StarCraft. It just doesn't line up with their own lore. I don't understand. DKs are immobile enough as it is. The only reason that they are able to connect with most targets in the first place is because of Death's Advance, negating the effectiveness of snares, as well as their one death grip to close gaps every 25 seconds. The fact that they lack a teleport or instant movement mechanic should be punishment enough. I don't see why they are trying to punish players for using Lichborn with this movement speed penalty. Now, I will acknowledge, if that 50% self-snare was dispelled today, it would be an overpowered ability. It'd become even more essential to the class than Necrotic Strike is to Unholy right now. What I would like to see instead is, rather than a 50% reduced movement speed debuff, which kind of in some ways will cause you to take more damage than you would before you even popped Lichborn, I'd rather see a reduction in damage dealing capacity while you have Lichborn active. Remember, in the same set of WoW lore covering the undead, abilities such as Unholy Frenzy in the past and Warcraft 3 caused you to take damage over time while you had it active. There are penalties to the benefits that Undeath gives you in the lore. We could perhaps impose a penalty to damage dealt, similar to a warrior defensive stance, maybe like 15% reduced damage during the duration of Lichborn. And let's chalk it up to muscular atrophy that Undeath brings. Clearly, as you're becoming more skeletal, so too goes your muscle mass. Or perhaps that because your mental faculties are decaying as you become more mindlessly undead, those basic abilities which use runes and or runic power will cost more. So like a Death Coil now costing 80 runic power instead of 40. Remember, this is a powerful defensive cooldown on a short timer. You're popping it because you most likely are not in a position to do damage anyways. This prevents it from being a God mode button for 10 seconds. Transfusion, for all the good it does, allowing you to spam back to back death strikes. I think you can get up to 5 to 7 depending on your haste and how much runic power you start with. It doesn't have room to be included in the current 8.1 meta, in my opinion. The other options are just too good. Raise Abomination. So, this ability has a lot of issues. First off, there is no visible range indicator of where the Abomination will patrol. Let's compare this to the Fell Lord that Demonology Warlocks currently have access to. You see a very clear demarcation on the ground of where that Fell Lord can swing his axe. This creates uncertainty for both the player and the enemy team, which overall makes for very messy and confusing gameplay. You can't really plan around an area that you don't have defined. Almost every other ability in the game, to include Hunter's Flare, Death and Decay, Blizzard, Ring of Frost, just about everything else has a demarcation line which shows you don't go into here or come in here at your own risk. Why can't that be repeated with Raise Abomination? That aside, the nature of Arena is very mobile. I mean, people usually swap starting positions within the first minute of the game or so. And this is a static ability. This is meant to influence a very small niche portion of the map for its 25 seconds. The A-bomb in theory should melee targets that come near it. It should apply Festering Wounds. It should apply Virulent Plague. All great things on a 1.5 minute cooldown. However, in duels, it has not performed. It is regarded as a friendly target against players. I went out to the open world and tried to fight some monsters to see if this was exclusive to duels. No, it is not. It will walk around untargetable by enemies. It doesn't do anything of what it was advertised except for wander around. It does do that well. If this ability were to suddenly work, I could see it possibly working out in RBGs, as it has a great potential for guarding nodes. The minute you sense trouble from another team Perhaps you get wind that a rogue is coming your way. You got the rogue out of stealth. He cloaks and vanishes, and you know he's about to open up again. You can plop down this Raise Abomination, and you know that even after triple sap and maybe even blind, that Abomination will still be up and operational, offering an extra layer of complexity to a ninja cap scenario. It's not just another undead mob that will melee things as soon as they pop out of stealth and try to cap. It also has a constant rolling application of Virulent Plague, essentially the undead outbreak ability. Really disappointed that this was obviously bugged on the PTR. I hope to God that it is working as soon as the servers come back online. Alright, now with that said, let's get into the consequential talent updates. For the longest time, there has been sort of a generally accepted Unholy DK build, as I show here. The changes to that, I feel, are going to be in a few rows. First row being level 56. For the longest time, if you wanted to do optimal single target damage, it usually was a mix-up between Infected Claws and All Will Serve, with Clawing Shadows being a more niche ability for when you are playing against ranged classes with minimal uptime. Now, I believe that the indubitable choice for every matchup is going to be Infected Claws, because the value that Necrotic Strike now provides during Death and Decay, there is no denying that you will need as many Festering Wounds up as possible, and your pet goes a long way towards generating those just through his auto attacks. The next change, level 90 row. Pestilence was usually the go-to just because it also applied those very valuable Festering Wounds at a rate of 10% per tick in that Death and Decay. 10% isn't all that reliable to begin with, and now with the value of Death and Decay transcending the ability to apply Festering Wounds and knocking other stealth classes out and keeping things in combat from drinking, you really want to examine how you can have a more impactful Death and Decay and more often. Defile does both of that. It reduces the cooldown on Death and Decay by 10 seconds, going from 30 to 20 seconds. Very good already. Let's now also look at the fact that targets that stand in the Death and Decay and additional enemies that walk in haphazardly will cause it to grow in size, meaning the chance that your Necrotic Strike will hit other targets is now exponentially increased. Great for situations where the enemy is really planting their feet and you know you can count on them not to move, i.e. a stun combo, or you've pushed someone into the starting room on Runes of Lordaeron, for example. Very, very good talent now. I think Defile should be baseline. Okay, and the last change I think will occur as of 8.1 is the level 100 row. Summon Gargoyle has been lackluster forever. I don't see it, coming back out in any significant way. There have been no changes to its design, no Azerite talents to support its further consideration. It's always been Unholy Frenzy because it allows you to spend all of your Festering Wounds and Necrotic Strikes very, very rapidly, but thanks to that 20% haste and the additional application of Festering Wounds while you're auto-attacking. I now think, because of the power of Magus of the Dead and Necromancer's Bargain, that you could see a full shift to 100% selection of Army of the Damned. Before we get into all the Azerite traits in the next section, for the sake of simplicity, Necromancer's Bargain and Magus of the Dead essentially transform Apocalypse into that very familiar class archetype we see of that 45-second burst ability, i.e. like a Colossus Smash or a Toxic Blade. This has transformed Apocalypse into such an important cooldown. You want it up as often as possible. Army of the Damned delivers that. Death Coil now is a catalyst for quicker Dark Transformation, seeing that that's a 1-minute cooldown that gets hastened by every Death Coil, reducing 1 second from its cooldown. Now Death Coil will do the same for Army of the Dead, reducing its cooldown by 1 second every time you coil. Okay, now let's get into the new Azerite traits for this season, with some honorable mentions to include the old 8.0 Azerite traits, as they are seemingly force-fed to us on many of the new pieces, to include Season 2 PvP armor. So starting off, let's talk about Last Surprise. I have found this trait on just about 50% of new additions to the Azerite armor catalog. While it's tempting, I would highly recommend against it. Last Surprise's PvP implementation has been nerfed twice since launch already, and it will likely never see the light of viability after the tear that it was on from September to November this year. Essentially, it was one-shotting people when you lined up your Army of the Dead together with Apocalypse and a heavy mastery build. Even if it were viable, even if those nerfs were rolled back, people have still adapted to the playstyle. They have been conditioned by now to play around it, use their defensive when they suspect the ghouls will expire and explode. This is essentially the undead version of Beastmaster Stampede that we saw right at release, and it is very counterable. Would not recommend. It's a one-trick pony. Next up, we have Cold Hearted. I am really excited about this ability. It is a perfect gift bow on top of the amazingness of the new Lichborn for many reasons that which we will discuss. Okay, so there's two aspects to Cold Hearted that make it so wonderful. Let's talk about the cooldown reduction first. While on the tooltip it states that you will see a 15-second reduction in Icebound Fortitude, it makes no claim as to how it will affect Lichborn. In my testing, it has been found to reduce the Lichborn cooldown by 5 seconds. So with Fortitude, you will see a 165-second cooldown after Cold Hearted is applied. With Lichborn, you will see a 55-second cooldown after Cold Hearted is applied. You cannot reduce these values further with additional stacks of Cold Hearted. It is hard capped at 55 seconds and 165 seconds respectively. For obvious reasons, this makes Lichborn even more powerful than Icebound Fortitude. I disagree with the inability to reduce the cooldown further with additional stacks of Cold Hearted. Icebound Fortitude is already a brutal 3-minute cooldown. If you're going out of your way to stack Cold Hearted, you're probably giving up on some other optimal damage dealing talents in the first and second rings. I really think that they should re-examine that in order to perhaps give Icebound Fortitude a glimmer of hope as to still being an alternative to Lichborn, because as of right now it is so one-sided. And that's just regarding the cooldown. Now let's look at the actual heal. The heal is a hot that ticks every second for the full duration of the ability. Now the limiting factor to how effective this heal is going to be is the duration of its affected defensive cooldown. Lichborn, being 10 seconds, automatically makes this superior to Icebound Fortitude. Let's not forget that you can have Lichborn up 3 times more often than Icebound Fortitude. So just in one instance, let's not forget, the full duration of an arena match, and the one instance where you would use it, Lichborn still will heal more because of its extra 2 seconds of duration. As for the HOT itself, with one stack, this testing was using 420 Azerite pieces with Azerite Empowerment unlocked on each of them. You will see 1.7k per second base heal with the ability to crit up to 3.4k. 2 stacks, 3.4k base heal, 6.8k crit heal. 3 stacks, 5.1k base heal, crit heal of 10.2k. So it looks like you start to see a little bit of a diminishing return in the 3rd stack, but it is still very potent, and more importantly, it's reliable. Unlike the other choices in that ring, such as Impassive Visage, which can be counted on to heal you once every 6 seconds thanks to that internal timer, this will heal you for 5 figures when you need it most during that stun. Rogue Kidney shots you, you're gonna pop Lichborn or Icebound most likely to get out of it. It's usually when an enemy team stuns you that they plan on using their biggest damage abilities, and this heal buffers that very well. One of the most amazing defensive talents in that ring that you can get your hands on in the game, in my opinion. Having at least one stack is critical, as you'll see in my recommendations for best in slot Azerite armor pieces. You will see that one of them does include Cold Hearted. Thank God it does. Okay, up next, March of the Damned. This is an amazing talent which offers additional mobility to your already great tool, Death's Advance. As you see from the tooltip, it offers a speed bonus whenever you use Death's Advance for 15 seconds, and it also reduces the cooldown of Death's Advance from 45 to 40 seconds. Just like Cold Hearted, the duration reduction aspect of the trait does not stack. Rather, whether you use 1, 2, or 3 of these, we'll be stuck with a 40-second Death's Advance. I feel like this is encouraging in their design, a variety of abilities, as opposed to really sinking your teeth in to one aspect, one build. Who's to say whether or not that's good or bad for the class long term, but it is what it is. As for the movement speed component, there are really 2 considerations you must make. As a reminder, when you cast Death's Advance, it ensures that you will move no slower than 100% of your normal movement speed, and in addition, you have an 8-second mini sprint of 30%. So normally, untraded, you will see a guaranteed 100% move speed, and outside of a snare, 130% sprint. With March of the Damned now added into the mix with one trait, you will now have a 142% movement speed during Death's Advance. And then as soon as that mini sprint ends at the 8-second mark, you now have an additional 7 seconds of 112% movement speed, which is really, really cool. At 2 traits, you now have 147% movement speed during Death's Advance, 117% movement speed outside of that mini sprint for the remaining 7 seconds. At 3 traits, you now have 149% movement speed during your Death's Advance mini sprint, 119 seconds after it fades away. So as you can see there, really quickly you get some nasty diminishing returns by the time you get to the 2nd trait. The 3rd trait is laughable, getting an extra 2% movement speed. I would not recommend it. Looking at the raw stat, you're talking about 1,000 speed right there. Speed is a tertiary trait already. It really wasn't designed to be stacked that much. March of the Damned makes the tertiary trait of speed very useful because it comes right exactly in the moment when you need speed the most. That's hence why you were pressing Death's Advance in the first place, probably to get away or to catch up to something. Highly recommend going with at least one of these. And again, like Cold Hearted, you just so miraculously have one of these in the best arrangement of Azurite armor you can. Next up, Runic Barrier. This is so nice. It increases the duration of your anti-magic shell from its base of 5 seconds to 6 seconds. If you were to spec into Spell Eater, the level 75 talent, you now have a 10-second AMS turning into an 11-second AMS. That's an eternity, and that's just the duration component. So already, we're seeing an amazing talent here because it extends the duration of that magic immunity. AMS is oftentimes used not for mitigating incoming magic damage, but for preventing application of harmful debuffs or crowd control abilities such as Polymorph, Fear, and Hodge, and the like. So already this is an amazing trait. What's more, it also massively increases the amount absorbed. 27k more absorption per stack is just amazing. That's an extra greater pyro or pyro crit or any other plethora of spell abilities. Through triple stacking these traits on 420 item level pieces, assuming you have all the Azurite rings unlocked to include the middle core Azurite empowerment to boost the values even higher, plus the Spell Eater talent, I was able to achieve 219k absorption in AMS, which was 86% of my total HP being 254k. Now, having 86% of my HP bar covered by anti-magic shell for 11 seconds every minute felt amazing. However, I understand that I would probably never go for that build in realistic PvP because I'd be giving up too many other great first and second ring talents. However, it's just interesting to know that for that esoteric PvE content that people want to do, maybe they want to solo some sort of raid boss, from recent content in Legion, This offers a very potent way to get around some of those difficult magic damage fights. Of note, when I did all the stacking, the tooltip read 119k absorption, but when I actually read the tooltip on my buff bar, it read the full amount of 219k absorption, which is a discrepancy of about 99k. Not sure what's up with that. Just something to note that when you're testing this ability for yourself on live servers, pay not so much attention to the tooltip of AMS on your hotbar, but rather the buff that is granted to you up in the top right of your screen once you activate it. Alright, now let's talk about Festermite. So this remains king, and it will be a part of every piece of Azerite armor that I suggest being best in slot. Essentially, it changes the way you look at the class. To explain, especially for those who are coming back to Unholy DK after giving up on it, which I don't blame you if you did, it offers the perfect capstone to the current vision the WoW dev team has for the 8.0, 8.1 Unholy DK. Well, any DK can ramp up damage by stacking those festering wounds, taking an operational pause to regain their full rune bar, and then spend those runes to pop all the festering wounds. No DK can quite do it like the way a Festermite DK can. It changes the way you look at wounds fundamentally. Rather than being a bothersome prerequisite to the quote-unquote finisher moves of the class, such as Scourge Strike, Necrotic Strike, they now become similar to strength potions waiting to be imbibed during a flawless succession of globals in your burst window. Now every time you pop that wound with your Necrotic Strike, you're not only getting the benefit of applying a nasty healing absorption debuff to your target, you're also getting X amount of strength per pop. Seeing that Festermite buff stack on your screen, it feels as good as hitting perfect notes on Guitar Hero. It's just a transformative trait that highly rewards patience and critical thinking, something that cannot be said for other major first and second ring traits in BFA at this time. Alright, let's talk about Bonespike Graveyard. So this works with both Death and Decay as well as Defile should you talent into it. It only works on the initial cast though. It'll only hit targets that were inside the range ring on your initial drop. Targets that leave and re-enter are unaffected. Being a second ring talent, I believe Bone Spikes should be a persistent benefit to the entire duration of Death and Decay. I mean, this really feels like a weak third or fourth ring talent. I feel like it's missing the intent of Lord Marrowgar's original spell in Icecrown Citadel. With the actual aesthetics of the ability, the Bone Spike in question, it looks like a very tiny StarCraft lurker-esque spine that appears underneath the feet of the targets hit by the Death and Decay. But it's so small that it's barely noticeable in the chaos of combat. I almost missed it several times with my eyes glued to the screen waiting for it. The spikes need to be much larger in order to be noticed by the player, his team, and the opposition, so that perhaps they can plan around it. Like, let's not all stack together to give him a good heal every 25 seconds when he casts Defile or Death and Decay. Hell Chains. I really feel like I needed a smartphone to make this talent work correctly. No, seriously, the tooltip is true to its reality, and it screams of a cheap Diablo 3 copy-paste. It takes a lot of effort to make Hell Chains hit the target intentionally. In the course of doing so, I found myself modifying good positional habits to make it hit, which is ultimately counterproductive. Besides fire not fitting with the Death Knight fantasy in the slightest, it is also bound to break every CC conceivable, with the chain's radius only limited by the imagination and movement of the player target your ghoul is following. 1.3k fire tick with 420 Azerite armor at 1 stack can crit as well for 2.6k. Okay, now for one of the more exciting Azerite traits to hit us in 8.1, let's talk about Magus of the Damned. A whole lot to unpack here. This is a first having a skeletal caster minion available to Unholy Death Knights. Up until now, we've had plenty of melee options through the regular ghoul minion and Army of the Dead Ghouls. We've also had the addition of a ranged physical DPS minion in the form of the Skulker, given to us by All Will Serve, and now is rounded out by that caster undead minion. So taking a look at just the tooltip here itself, it's summoned upon the use of Apocalypse and Army of the Dead, although Army of the Dead will see far less usage due to its prohibition from rated PvP being an 8-minute cooldown. Hilariously enough, the tooltip is already messed up. It states that it will summon a Magus of the Damned upon use of Apocalypse and Army of the Damned. Wait, what? Army of the Damned is the name of the level 100 talent, which reduces the cooldown of Army of the Dead. They meant to say Dead Vice Damned. Small indie company, by the way. Moving on. So, minion basics here. Let's look at its HP. It's exactly 50% of your own total HP. So that will scale with you, which is cool. It moves at the same ridiculous speed as your Army of the Dead ghouls. It continues to cast while moving. This is super nice to ensure continued uptime on targets. Casts are uninterruptible. Essentially, you'll see that they have that nice gray cast bar. It's like they have permanent aura mastery. Even if someone wanted to take the time to kick or interrupt or stun, I guess they could stun. That's the only way they can really stop the cast, through a gouge, a stun, a hard CC option, which is really good for you guys if they're using CC on your minion. Occasionally, it will charge towards the target's melee range, as this unit is coded as capable of melee damage, just in the same way normal Army of the Dead ghouls are. It appears to lag behind your /pet attack commands that you can bake into other weapon skill macros. I tend to put pet attack at the end of a lot of my melee damage abilities to ensure that all of my minions are on the same target I am, and it seems to kind of take a few extra seconds or repeats of those pet attack commands in order to get it to behave how I want it, so it could be a bit more responsive. Lastly, I noticed that it is affected by Last Surprise should you choose to use that trait. However, I don't. Okay, so now let's go into its abilities. Frostbolt, 1.7 second cast, applies a nice 50% magic snare for 5 seconds, cast range of 40 yards. The 1.7 second cast is unaffected by player haste, which is good, seeing that versatility will likely remain dominant over haste and value for Unholy DKs as a whole, which means you're not penalized, you're not losing out on Magus of the Damned potential damage. In my testing, with 420 item level Azurite pieces stacked 3 times with the full Azurite empowerment unlock due to the restrictions being lifted on the PTR, I was seeing Frostbolt averages of 6.4k per cast with occasional crits for 12k plus. So it looks like as your Rune of the Fallen Crusader and other damage abilities proc, increasing your overall DPS, so too rises your average damage for this Frostbolt ability. And as that rises, so does the crit. It seems to crit for exactly twice what your normal cast will on your Magus. What's also great is that this ability will register as a separate damage entry on details, along with Shadow Bolt and the melee swing, which we'll get into next. So it really is very easy to discern from the other abilities when it comes to parsing and really figuring out how your damage works, whether it be in PvP or raids. So next, Shadow Bolt. Similar to the Frostbolt, it has a 1.7 second cast. It hits harder than the Frostbolt, which is awesome because that's just how the relationship between Frostbolt and Shadow Bolt is in the real WoW engine. It's always gotten a little bit more damage in exchange for not having a debuff associated with its successful cast. I haven't looked at the really nitty-gritty hard math, but I assume that it scales with Mastery Dreadblade, and that's what kind of adds into that extra damage discrepancy we'll see here. It has a 40-yard range, just like Frostbolt, unaffected by player haste, and with the same gear, 420 level Azurite pieces stacked 3 times, I was noticing a 7.6k average cast, which is 1.2k higher than the Frostbolt, and crits of 15k plus, so exactly double of whatever your average is. Also a separate entry on details. The peculiar thing that I wasn't expecting with the Magus is that occasionally it will charge up to melee range on your target. It's really unpredictable whether it'll do it or not. Regardless of whether or not your Magus goes to the target or the target comes to your Magus, if it has the opportunity, it will commence auto swings, and it auto swings about once per second. It does an average damage of 1k per swing. I have seen it crit for exactly twice the damage, so 2k, and this is with 420 item level Lazarite pieces stacked 3 times, and it does show up as a separate damage entry details, so you can confirm this for yourself in your own testing. That's like the icing on the cake. As if it didn't do enough damage already, it's now auto swinging as well. It has enough HP where it's not worthwhile to try to kill it. It's already on a 20-second lifespan, so to dump damage into it or to try to interrupt it through stuns or incapacitates is just extra value added. This is a really strong ability, and I cannot see any Unholy DK conceivably ignoring this trait. It is so good. This is also strong enough where it really warrants re-examination of that level 100 talent row that we talked about earlier. Army of the Damned is directly responsible for reducing the cooldown of Apocalypse, which allows you to get that Magus of the Damned up and on the battlefield. In a way, the relationship that Arms Warriors currently see between Anger Management and Colossus Smash, allowing your Rage Spent to reduce the cooldown on Colossus Smash, and Warbreaker, its upgraded form, is very similar to how I think Army of the Damned and Apocalypse will be viewed, because the more runic power you spend on Death Coil, the quicker you will have Apocalypse back up online, ready to use to set up another burst attempt with this Magus. One Death Coil is 1 second off the cooldown of Apocalypse, and Death Coil already reduces the cooldown of your Dark Transformation, which empowers your ghoul to do that nice stun and charge interrupt. So yeah, I think that Army of the Damned is going to become more mainstream. It may even beat out Unholy Frenzy in a lot of cases. These Maguses hit like a truck, these Magi. I swear to God, you guys gotta try it out. This finding, more so than any other, has really influenced my top picks, what I claim to be best in slot Azurite pieces for head, shoulders, and chest. So I've also gone out of the way to pick a runner-up slot for each armor type, so let's get into it. The first piece, in the head slot, I see 2 real winners here. It was pretty close, but one edged out over the other, and the best headpiece, in my opinion, is definitely the Helm of Abyssal Malevolence. The picks that allow you to get Magus of the Dead and Fester Might are just overpowered in my opinion. You're talking about the 2 best parts of Death Knight gameplay. Both traits revolutionize how you play the class. It fundamentally alters it. For that reason, I hands down ignore all of their pieces. That was my first selection criteria when I was sifting through all the pages upon pages of gear they give you on the PTR. The first cut that had to be made was, does it have Magus of the Dead? Great. Does it have Fester Might? Okay. Now, let's take a look at the other rings. If it didn't have those 2, I didn't even consider it. So, Magus of the Dead and Fester Might on the first and second ring of Abyssal Malevolence. Third ring, it has Overwhelming Power, which is an amazing haste buff, and I'm sure you are probably already well acquainted if you've been playing in 8.0. Even better, this helmet has Cold Hearted, that really nice heal that we talked about, that heals you every second during your Icebound Fortitude and or Lichborn. So for that reason, it was an easy number 1 pick. Number 2 pick is the Sea Brawler's Great Helm, which also has Fester Might and Magus of the Dead. However, its 3rd and 4th ring talents are less exciting, that being Azurite Globules and Resounding Protection, not really the best. Azurite Globules are infamous for breaking CC. Not that you're really concerned with CC and DK comps, because your Virulent Plague is already making a mess of things anyways. Resounding Protection, 17k Absorb Shield every 30 seconds pales in comparison to what Cold Hearted can do for you. So yeah, Helm of Abyssal Malevolent first, Sea Brawlers, Great Helm second. Okay, now let's look at the shoulder slot. So, number 1 pick, Kraken Chill Pauldrons. This gives you Festermite in the first row, Magus of the Dead in the second row, Earthlink in the third row, and March of the Damned in the fourth row. This is just too good to be true. So the Kraken Shell gives you those 2 key abilities. Earthlink is, it's like an Incanter's Flow for strength or whatever. It's alright, you know, it's really not worthwhile to try to alter your gameplay around it, but it's just a little bit more strength, you know, maybe when you need it, maybe when you don't. Key thing that makes this shoulder really stand out over the runner-up option, which we'll discuss, is because it has that March of the Damned ability, and just with 1 trait, you know, and you only will see 1 trait in the best in slot lineup of March of the Damned, is that 1 trait alone will give you that very nice 12% extra move speed during the active part of March of the Damned and during the remaining 7 seconds after the active sprint is over. Just a really nice touch. 12% can make a huge difference in avoiding extra GCDs from pursuing melee classes and maybe just getting around that pillar a little quicker, dodging the end of that GPI cast. Very excited about this shoulder, and what's more is that a lot of these pieces, as I mentioned earlier, are available. You may already have some of these pieces from doing 8.0 Mythic Dungeon content and or your Azerite chests at the end of the week. The runner-up for shoulders is the Sinister Gladiators Plate Shoulder Guards, and it too has Magus of the Dead and it has Festermite. Great, but what's less impressive is that in the third row it is rocking Azerite Globules once again, fire damage, meh, Impassive Visage for its 4th ring talent, and that's a 6k heal once every 6 seconds when you take damage. I mean, you could make an argument for it, but like I was saying earlier, DKs really don't have a problem with healing. Thanks Blizzard, we have like 20 ways to heal ourselves now. What we really need is additional tools to prevent damage, and nothing prevents damage like speed. March of the Damned gives you that speed. Moving on to chest pieces. This is the first piece which will force you to do raid content. This chest is only available in Battle of Dazara lore. It's called the Sea Swell chest plate. It has Festermite and Magus of the Dead in the 1st and 2nd rings. Really good. Huh. 3rd ring, Overwhelming Power again. So if you get this full lineup, you're going to have 2 stacks of Overwhelming Power in addition to these amazing game-changing traits, Festermite and Magus of the Dead. As if that wasn't PogChamp enough, in the 4th row, they also give you Runic Barrier. This is intentional design. They know what they were doing when they put, you know, these awesome DK specific defensive 4th ring abilities on these overpowered pieces. They're doing this on purpose to force us to check out the new abilities, and I love it. Runic Barrier, as a reminder, gives you an increased duration of 1 extra second on your anti-magic shell, and it also absorbs an extra 27k damage. So much goodness packed in this one piece of armor. The runner-up, really close, Sinister Gladiators Plate chest piece. It offers the same abilities, Magus of the Dead, Festermite, Overwhelming Power, Runic Barrier. The key difference though between it and the Sea Swell chest plate is that it offers you Magus of the Dead first. I prefer the Sea Swell because you get Festermite quicker. I feel that it's just slightly more important than Magus of the Dead, however good Magus of the Dead is. And when you're going into a new season and you're kind of struggling for the Azerite power to unlock all of the rings, if I push came to shove, I would choose to have access to Festermite first. Regardless, those are my 1st and 2nd choices for every Azerite armor slot. The key theme, the key takeaway though, is you need to have Festermite and Magus of the Dead on every slot if you really want to optimize your damage this season. I am excited. I can't wait to bring my Unholy DK into super relevance. I've been kind of keeping my DK as like this back burner, you know, play it when I'm bored. alts compared to my arms warriors. I have one on Alliance and Horde, and then I only have this Alliance DK on Kel'Thuzad. Hopefully you guys are as excited as I am about that. Also in this video, although I wasn't originally planning on it, there are some trinkets to look out for. Couldn't help but notice that there are a lot of cool trinkets introducing some never before seen concepts, which I thought were really cool. First up, let's look at the Everchill Anchor. On every damaging melee ability, not pet attack, not death coil, not death and decay, none of your ranged kit, damaging melee abilities only, it will apply a small frost damage dot. It also applies a 2% snare for 12 seconds, and this stacks 10 times, up to 20%. With the spammy nature of Unholy, where you're really just pumping out a lot of necrotics and scourge strikes occasionally, festering strikes, the snare could stack up high enough to keep you from having to use Chains of Ice on a kill target, freeing up an extra rune and global for more necrotics, whereas you may normally be using Chains of Ice instead. Something to play around with. The frost damage isn't as exciting, honestly probably better for frost DKs, but does warrant further experimentation. Next one I'm really excited about, Somdi's Bargain. So this is Blood Death Knight's Purgatory talent in the form of a trinket and on a 6-minute cooldown. The 6-minute cooldown is applied in the form of a debuff called Somdi's Bargain Fulfilled. Saves you from the killing blow first off. It then heals you for a predetermined number, with it scaling up the higher the item level is. At 415 item level, it heals you for 60k. Then you get Somdi's Bargain, which is a debuff which absorbs healing equal to 60% of that damage prevented, which in a PvP environment is no big deal. Your healer is probably already having you targeted and spamming heals into you, so that healing absorption will go away lickety split. It's essentially adding in a cheat death mechanic to a spec that otherwise would never have access to it. That's something that rogues have, fire mages have, blood DKs have. Really nice, especially considering the survivability problems Unholy DKs have and will continue to experience in 8.1. The animation and the aura applied to your character is a very subtle teal mist that's centered on your chest, and it would easily be missed during hectic combat. There's no real loud sound or high density particle effects that would be seen with the Rogue's Cheat Death or the Death Knight's Purgatory, so you really got to keep an eye out for it on when you're fighting other players and yourself. In fact, it may even warrant some sort of power aura creation. Very exciting trinket. It looks like, just from the name of it, it's going to be available in Dazara lore. Next one, Sinister Gladiator Safeguard. So this operates exactly like Zalzak's Veiled Eye from Mithrax and Uldir, which saw notorious use during the WoW Arena World Championship. It grants a 65k absorb at 415 trinket item level for 10 seconds as soon as you dip below 25%. It has a cooldown of once every 2 minutes. Helps out your healer, gives them an extra global to get you back up to full. Okay, the next one, Grong's Primal Fury. To me, this really felt like a static blade storm. Your character enlarges in size and it turns a brownish tint. Imagine how Avatar looks on a warrior, where you get larger and you turn that gunmetal gray color. In addition to that, you lose your ability to move and you can't cast or use abilities. Your character then performs 6 animations identical to the warrior ability Skull Splitter, where it kind of lunges forward and slams the ground or target with their weapon with one hand. Your character performs the Skull Splitter Colossus Smash animation 6 times over 4 seconds. At the end of each of these Skull Splitter Colossus Smash animations, you deal physical AoE damage to all targets within 6 to 7 yards. During the testing, the range felt a little bit sporadic and RNG based. Sometimes hit number 5 would hit the dummy, whereas hit number 2, 3, and 4 didn't. The damage is very interesting. The tooltip on it at 415 item level states that it's 106k damage split among enemies, which would imply that if you can get one target alone, it'll do 106 damage to that single target. According to the tooltip though, you are rewarded for additional damage for having more than one target hit. It implies that the more targets you hit with it, the more damage it will do, like extra bonus damage. So this math isn't clearly defined, it's very muddy. Also important to note, you can turn your character during this channeling, which is very good for defensive purposes because you always want to have the opportunity to parry incoming attacks and you want to keep your back unexposed. In general, it offers a nice physical cleave that Unholy sorely lacks. It seems like it has some potential. If the channeling effect was longer than 4 seconds, I'd be worried about it. To me, it just seems like something intimidating you could do to bait defensives during the course of an asphyxiate. Being 4 seconds, you can asphyxiate, pop this trinket, and not really have any risk of the target running away because they are sitting the stun and they're going to eat this full trinket cast. Finally, let's look at Sinister Gladiator's Maledict. This is a very interesting trinket. It is a nasty burst trinket, perfectly suited to Unholy in my opinion. For those of you who remember Wrath of the Lich King and that nasty gnomish engineering trinket, the gnomish lightning generator, this operates a lot like that. Once you click on it and use it, it begins an invisible 1.5 second cast. And I say it like that because there is no cast bar. A little purple shadowy orb appears above your head or the head of the caster, and a shadowy whisper sound, not unlike that which you would hear during the casting of a Shadow Priest ability, begins playing. At the end of this hidden 1.5 second cast, the shadowy orb above the caster's head will launch towards the target and does about 40k damage at 415 item level, shadow damage, and in addition to that, it applies a nasty debuff where 68.5k healing will be absorbed for the next 6 seconds. Now, this is a debuff called Gladiator's Maledict. It remains to be seen on how it will interact with Necrotic Strike. Will it absorb healing before an ongoing Necrotic Strike, or will it absorb what's left after the Necrotic Strike? Of note, the shadowy orb will stay in place where you first casted it from. This can offer some really interesting play, especially considering the 50 to 55 yard range it appears to have. I couldn't believe it. This thing is a long distance cruise missile on Nogrand Arena. I can see you launching this at somebody on the opposite side of the map at their pillar from your own pillar. Even worse is that you can press it, run around the corner so you're no longer even on line of sight, and it will still launch and hit somebody really hard for a lot of shadow damage, especially since you have Dreadblade, improving its damage even further. It can crit as well at 415 item level. It hit 39k normally for me and crit for 78k. All in all, it's a much nastier version of the Wrath of the Lich King Gnomish Lightning Generator. At least with that one, you had to be somewhat close. This is ridiculously long ranged. I suspect that will get nerfed pretty soon because I think everybody and their mom, even healers, are going to rock this. So in conclusion, PvP talents are a hot mess. Too many good choices that feel essential to class viability. If you try to go heavy into survivability by getting Lichborn and Transfusion and Necrotic Strike, it comes at great expense to your damage potential individually and team-wide. This kind of sacrifice is not asked of other melee DPS classes such as Arms, Vengeance, etc. Why is it being asked of Unholy? I don't understand it. Lichborn, Necrotic Strike, and Necromancer's Bargain seems, in my opinion, to be the best blend of personal damage and survivability you can ask for. Yes, you give up Necrotic Aura, but I'm sure your team will overlook it when you begin lobbing very nasty Shadow Bolt and Frostbolt crits at opponents in the form of that Magus of the Damned minion. Additionally, I'm sure they won't complain too much when you begin surviving a lot more burst attempts than often through the use of Lichborn. Transfusion, well, it's a great idea. It just has no place in this very calculating and competitive PvP talent meta. Like I was saying, the PvP talents, baseline talents, and the talent tree need a complete from the ground rework. They might want to consider taking the current people off the Unholy DK portfolio, putting them somewhere else, getting some fresh minds in there, and they also need to take a healthy look at how Wrath of the Lich King DK and other expansion Death Knights have played, because this is just a travesty as it stands right now. Imagine being the dev that worked on Transfusion so hard, coding it, making sure it came as advertised and worked, and then no one chooses it because there's no room for it in the meta. I'd be furious. Transfusion right now has more of a place in PvE than it does in PvP, thanks to that restrictive class design prohibiting its selection over more compelling talents. Transfusion is a compelling reason alone to turn on War Mode if you're a PvEer looking to solo elite world quests or other difficult open world PvE content. Powerful self-healing on a very short cooldown. When Transfusion is cycled properly with Death Pact, you could live for a very, very long time. It also has the animation of a red rune appearing above your head, what appears to be a recycled asset from the old Blood Tap resource management utility. Once again, I can't say enough. Many abilities need to either be moved to the regular talent tree or made baseline. If for nothing else, please do that with Necrotic Strike. It needs to be baseline. If you make it compete with something else, even on the talent tree, Necrotic Strike is going to be chosen every single time over other abilities. It's too iconic, it's too central to the Unholy DK playstyle, and they can't make us forget about it. They've already given it to us, we've experienced it, the joy, the wonder. It's defined the class for so long, it has to be core to the class and the spec. Frosty Keys used to have access to it. They don't anymore. I understand, healing manipulation has always been kind of more of an unholy thing, but it has to be baseline to Unholy DKs. It just has to be. Also, while we're on the topic, can we get the old Death Coil animation back? Having my DK point her rune blade out to the rafters like she's calling out a home run every time I cast it makes me feel goofy, and it ruins the fantasy and the immersion. The old animation was much better. It was a regular two-handed weapon swing that ended with the Death Coil projectile being launched. It felt better. It felt like it was a serious ability. It just made me want to play even more. Little things like this matter. The look and feel matters. If you don't believe me, then look at how much money people spend on transmogs. Look and feel matters. Anyways, guys, this video went on way longer than I thought, but I am excited to do more of these in the future. Thank you to those of my subs who asked me to do this in the first place. It was an eye-opening experience as to how enjoyable research and testing really is. Please like, comment, and subscribe below, and keep me honest about what I can do better and what content you would like to see in the future. Additionally, be sure to check me out on Twitch, Twitter, and my other socials. You'll find in my description below. Anyways, see you guys around. Peace.